Yatkripatamo Vande Shri Gurudinataranam Paramanandam Mahanandam. Okay, so we were in the concluding part of the 10th chapter of the 5th canto. And quick recap, this is the beginning of the discussion between Jat Bharat and Maharaj Rahugana. And the concluding part is basically, so it begins with Jat Bharat being conscripted to carry the palanquin of King Rahugana. Jat Bharat is walking erratically to avoid the ants, and King Rahugana's palanquin is being jostled, so he gets angry and he chastises him, speaking sarcastically. And then Jat Bharat gives very deeply philosophical answers. So Rahugana immediately understands that this is an elevated person. He gets off the palanquin, falls flat in front of him, apologizes for his inadvertent insults, and then he begins to ask questions based on the rejoinders by Jat Bharat. So, resuming from verse 23, Shashtabhigotana pratihi prajanam yah kinkaravayena pinashtipishtam swadharmamaradanam achutasya yadiha mano vijatyaghavam. San Prabhu, can you read the translation, please?
Yes. My dear sir, you have said that the relationship between the king and the subject, or between the master and the servant, are not eternal. But although such relationships are temporary, when a person takes the position of a king, his body is to rule the citizens and punish those who are disobedient to the law. By punishing them, he teaches the citizen to obey the laws of the state. Again, you have said that punishing a person who is deaf and dumb is like chewing the chew or grinding the pulps. So is to say there is no benefit in it. However, if one is engaged in his own professional duty as ordered by the Supreme Lord, his sinful activities are certainly diminished. Therefore, if one is engaged in his occupational duty by force, he benefits because he can vanquish all his sinful activities in that way.
So, as I had mentioned, that these are questions based on the responses of Jat Bharat, which in turn were based on the chastisement of Maharaj Rahugana. So, in the 7th verse of this chapter, the king had chastised him, saying, "Are you dead, despite the body within your life?" So, and in the 11th verse, Jat Bharat had responded, saying that everything that is material has a beginning and an end. Right? So, also in the 7th chapter, the king had chastised, saying that, "Do you not know that I am your master?" And Jat Bharat had responded in the 11th verse and the 12th verse, saying again that this distinction between the master and the servant is temporary and conventional. Now, the king is responding to these statements, right? So he's saying that even if it is temporary, while it exists, it is real. So he makes this distinction between temporary and illusory. Just because it is temporary does not mean it is illusory. This is one of the main responses to Mayavad philosophy. So the Mayavadis say that the whole material world is illusory because it is temporary. And the Vaishnavas say that it is true that it is temporary, but it is real. So here the king is using it from more the material perspective, saying that maybe the body is dead because it's made of matter, but while there is a soul in it, temporarily the body is animated, right? So things that are related to the body are relevant while the body has soul in it. Similarly, he says that the master-servant distinction is temporary. He says yes, but while it lasts, then those relationships have to be honored. And then he gives his own example that when a person takes the position of the king, it is his duty to rule the citizens and punish those who are disobedient. Why? Because by punishing them, he elevates them. He teaches them how to obey the law. So the flip side of it is that if looking at the temporary nature of the material existence, the king does not be a king, and the citizen is, so everybody is completely devoid of any notion of accountability and relationship, the whole world will go into chaos. Right? Now, Jat Bharat has said that punishing a dull person is like grinding flour. And you won't get anything new out of it. The wheat is already ground to flour. If you grind it further, you're not going to get the wheat out of it. But Jat Bharat, he positions and to this response to this, saying that as a servant of the Lord, one should punish the dull persons, because in doing so, he will guide them towards serving the Lord. And thus, that person will become successful. Now, he's not talking really about bhakti over here. He's talking about varnashram dharma. That according to the varna and the ashram, everybody has a duty. If the person is not performing the duty, then the king has to punish, because that's the king's duty by varnashram to punish. And by scrupulously following the varnashram dharma, then one makes spiritual advancements. One's sins get destroyed. So what we see is that the king is making many apparently valid points. They seem reasonable, that yes, there has to be law and order. So people need to be punished by those who are authorized to punish them. Right? Even if the relationships are temporary, but while they last, one needs to honor them. Even though the body is dead, but while the soul is there, it's not dead. Fine, after the soul leaves, then no need. But yeah, there's a difference between a body with a soul and body without a soul. So this is the tendency to justify using scriptures. There is nothing wrong in what the king is saying. The only thing wrong is his motivation. So the whole purpose of the scriptures is what the king has said, acting according to the varnashram. But the king at this point, he is trying to justify his own material desires, taking shelter of the scriptures. And so the nature of the conditioned soul is that it has to enjoy. But if the soul is enjoying in an irreligious way, then the enjoyment is tainted by guilt. So how to reconcile these two things, that they want to enjoy, but without the guilt? Then here the righteousness comes in. Right? So in Madhuri Kadambini, Vishwanath Chakravarti says that one who has offended a Vaishnava may think that it is said everywhere that the holy name can wash away the sins of Vaishnava Aparadh. So I will take shelter of the holy name. Why should I demean myself by falling at the feet of that Vaishnava? Better to display my faith in the holy name and become purified and become even more exalted. So what does this do? That the person who was currently inflicted by Vaishnava Aparadh has now an additional affliction of Nama Aparadh, right? Because performing sinful activities on the strength of the holy name. So now instead of one offense, he is now afflicted with two offenses. Or Chakravarti Path says the person might think that if that person, the nature of an Vaishnava is not to take offenses. So if that person is a Vaishnava, then he will not take any offense to what I said, so there is no Vaishnava. If that person does take offense, that means he is not a Vaishnava. So there is no Vaishnava. So there is no need for me to take forgiveness from him. So Vishwanath Chakravarti says that is even more reprobate. Reprobate means sinful. That is even a more sinful person who is taking shelter of partial philosophy to commit sinful activities appearing to be non-sinful. Right? So the person goes in offense of Vaishnava. One point he says that I'll chant the holy name and I'm okay. Another point he'll say, well, he's an advanced Vaishnava. So they don't take offense. And if he takes offense, he's not a Vaishnava. So there's no offense. So all these statements are true. That yes, advanced Vaishnavas don't take offense. Yes, you can take shelter of the holy name. But they're all tied by the common knot of sincerity. That one takes offense, one who has offended a Vaishnava must first exhaust all avenues of begging forgiveness from the Vaishnava. And if that does not work, then out of desperation take shelter of the holy name. One who has offended a Vaishnava, even if the Vaishnava does not take offense, the dust of the lotus feet of the Vaishnava will take offense. Which means Bhakti Devi will take offense. Krishna will take offense. Right? So that is the more complete understanding. By cherry picking things and putting them together, one creates a false home for their sinful activities, which is what the king is doing now. He's cherry picking aspects of Varnashram Dharma and justifying his own actions. The good thing is that he's not walking away with them. He's turning to Jad Bharat for clarification. Okay. Verse 24. Tanme bhavan naradeva bhimana madena tu chikrata satammasya krishta maitri drushamartha bandho yatha tare sadavadhyana mamaha.
Whatever you have spoken appears to me to be contradictory. Oh, best friend of the distress, I have committed a great offense by insulting you. I was puffed up with false prestige due to the processing of body of a king. For this, I have certainly become an offender. Therefore, I pray that you kindly glance at me with your causeless mercy. If you do so, I can relieve from sinful activities brought about by insulting you.
So this is now the redeeming aspect of the king's character. So, so we can see the king as being transparent. It's not that he was very much attached to justifying his position, but this is how he understood his role. So he's not denying his previous action. Yes, he was sitting on the palanquin. He was getting others to carry him, one person forcibly. He was chastising them. So here he was revealing that what was his thought process in doing what he was doing. He also understands that it may not be correct. So in this verse, he's displaying his humility. I was puffed up with false prestige due to possessing the body of a king, and for this I have certainly become an offender. Right? But he is going to Jat Bharat to remediate his offense. It's not that he said, okay, let me mentally give you obeisances and be remediated of my offense. Sometimes devotees also do that. They might offend another devotee in a more gross way, but they may beg forgiveness in a subtle way. And I was hearing one of the class, and the person was saying, it's like you insult a person in public and apologize in private. So there is obviously some mitigation that the person has mentally asked for forgiveness, but it still displays this duplicity. That the reason the person will not ask forgiveness in public is because the person is still attached to his pride. That others will think that I'm fallen, I'm lower, or I might get chastised. Right. So, and the king, he in front of everyone, he had fallen at the feet of Jat Bharat, and now he is openly accepting the fact that he made a mistake. And so he's saying, Srila Prabhupada says that that unconsciously the king offended Jat Bharat, but due to his good sense, he asked to be excused. This is the process by which one can be relieved from Vaishnava Prad. Krishna is always very simple and by nature merciful. When one commits an offense at the feet of a Vaishnava, one must immediately apologize to such a person so that his spiritual advancement may not be hampered. So the other point that is noted over here, implicitly in the past time and explicitly by Srila Prabhupada, is that the person should immediately apologize. Right? The person should not say that I will apologize next year or maybe whenever the time comes. Right. So as soon as the person recognizes the offense is there, the person should apologize. And an example that is given is that if you boil a milk in a pot, then there is a coating of milk that gets deposited in the pot. That's the nature of the milk. As it boils, it leaves behind a deposit. Now, if that coating is immediately cleaned, it's very easy to remove it. Just put some water, don't even need a lot of soap and scrubbing. But if you leave that pot overnight, then same milk, same pot, much more effort is needed because it is now allowed to sit and bind. Similarly, when the offense is allowed to fester, then it takes stronger and stronger hold, and it becomes more and more difficult to remove. We see the example of the Satgarbhas, that the original offense was insulting Brahma. And when Brahma was displaying certain bewildering behavior, they were laughing at. Because of that offense, they were born as the sons of Viprachiti. And that offense continued to fester. And according to the pastime, then they offended Hiranyakashipu, who was the grandfather. And then Hiranyakashipu cursed them, saying that you will be killed by your father. Now, they then again took birth in the womb of Devaki. And Viprachiti took birth as Viprachiti or somebody else. I think it was Kalnemi. And then Kalnemi took birth as Kamsa and he kills the 6 sons. And the offense still festered. Right? And they're basically now in Sutala, in the hellish planet, suffering over there. Right? And they're still suffering. And then, of course, it's only by the mercy of the Ahituki mercy of Devaki that Krishna gets them back. But that's the nature of offense. If it is not remediated, it festers. So, Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur, he explains the reason given by Maharaj Rahugana for committing these offenses. Right? So he says that the king is saying that I was intoxicated by the false identity as a king. Right? Then secondly, he says that I thought of myself learned and falsely proud, thinking, what do these people know? Right? So not only is he thinking that he's in an elevated position materially, but also intellectually. And thirdly, he says that the king says that I offended the greatest devotee, bewildered by this notion of I am a king, I'm intellectually very advanced. He says I have offended the greatest devotee. Now, along with admitting his mistake, he is also showing his complete dependence on the mercy of Jat Bharat. Right? So he says that if you do not help me, I will fall in hell. So without you, I have no support. Secondly, he says that if you can kindly show an affectionate glance to me. So he's appealing to the finer qualities of the Vaishnava. And thirdly, he says, help me cross the sin of offending a devotee. So he's acknowledging the sin that he has covered. And again, he is showing dependence. So the theme here is acknowledging and showing dependence. Similarly, when one asks for forgiveness from a Vaishnava for offending the Vaishnava, then it should be unconditional. Right? The person should not say that, look, I'm sorry I offended you, but you were also acting like a fool. I could not help myself. And I had a bad headache and I was so busy in service. That's why I offended you. Not really my fault. It's shared responsibility. But sometimes people, they ask for forgiveness from a platform of superiority. But I'm not the kind of person who holds back in showing and admitting when I'm wrong. And okay, if it makes you feel better, I'm wrong. That's fine, right? So the apology is also an offense. Jat Bharat is showing sincere apology. Right? So he's saying, because of this offense, I will fall into hell. And because you are kind and because you are capable, I am surrendering unto you. Next verse is the last verse of the chapter, verse 25. Na vikriya vishva suhurta sakhasya samyena vitamastvapi mahavimanat sukrutadimadram nanakshatya duradapi sulapanihi.
Oh, my dear Lord, you are the friend of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is a friend of all living entities. You are therefore equal to everyone, and you are free from the bodily conception. Although I have committed an offense by insulting you, I know that there is no loss or gain for you due to my insult. You are fixed in your determination, but I have committed an offense. Because of this, even though I may be as strong as Lord Shiva, I shall be vanquished without delay due to my offense at the lotus feet of Vaishnava.
So here the king, he's actively showing that he is not taking false shelter in after committing an offense. So earlier we had said that some people will not ask for forgiveness from a Vaishnava because they think that the Vaishnavas are advanced. Right? So he starts off by saying that you're the friend of the Lord. And since the Lord is a friend to everyone, you're also equal to everyone. Right? Whether the person offends you or does not offend you, you are equal to all. And you're also free from bodily consumption. So if somebody has insulted you based on the bodily consumption, then you will not be insulted because you are free from it. Right? So he's talking about the two aspects, that fully detached from a material conception, fully attached to a spiritual conception. And so he's saying that you are that. Then he says, although I have committed an offense by insulting you, I know there is no loss or gain for you due to my insult. Right. So now he's also going on that route, that because you are in this secure position of spiritual shelter and material indifference, my insulting is not going to offend you. Now he says, but I have committed an offense. So regardless of whether you are afflicted by that offense or not, and he's saying you are not, but regardless of that, the fact remains that I have committed an offense. So one may say that, okay, you have committed an offense, then do something to mitigate that offense. So the king says, even though I may be as strong as Lord Shiva, and so he's giving the high water mark. Lord Shiva is Devadev, very, very exalted. He says, even though I may be as strong as Lord Shiva, I'll be vanquished without delay due to my offense at the lotus feet of a Vaishnava, which means there's nothing that can protect me. Now, of course, protection is taking shelter, but other than that, he's saying there is nothing that can protect me. In the fourth canto, when Sati Devi was chastising Daksha, then she chastises him by saying that it is not wonderful for persons who have accepted the transient body as the self to engage in deriding great souls. So she's talking about Daksha, that you have accepted a transient body as yourself. And it is not wonderful for such people to deride the great souls. This is Daksha insulting Lord Shiva. Then she says that such envy on the part of materialistic person is very good, because that is the way they fall down. They are diminished by the dust of the feet of great personalities. And of course, she is in an angry mood, so she is wishing harm to her father. That you are materialistic, and you have offended a great Vaishnava. But it's a very good thing, because that offense is going to be the cause of your fall down. Not any repatriation from the great personality, not that the person will curse you, just that offense. He said they're diminished by the dust of the feet of the great personality. The people themselves do not do anything. It's the dust of the feet. And this question comes up once in a while. What is the dust of the feet of great personalities? And different answers. I heard once a person was saying that the Lord takes the dust of his devotee as tilak. So the dust of the great devotees is on the head of the Lord. Another time it was said that the dust of the lotus feet of great personalities is embodied by Bhakti Devi. So the Lord takes offense. The person of Bhakti Devi is essentially a partial expansion of Srimati Radharani. Radharani takes offense, Bhakti Devi takes offense. So even though the devotee doesn't take offense, Krishna might take offense, Srimati Radharani might take offense. Srila Prabhupada, in the purport, he writes that in Chaitanya Bhagavat, Vrindavan Das Thakur says that even if one is as strong as Lord Shiva, who carries a trident in his hand, one will nonetheless fall down from a spiritual position if he tries to insult a Vaishnava. That is the verdict of all Vaishnava scripture. And then he says that this is in Madhya 22, again Chaitanya Bhagavat, one who blasphemes a Vaishnava cannot be protected by anyone. Even if a person is as strong as Lord Shiva, if he blasphemes a Vaishnava, he is sure to be destroyed. That is the verdict of all Shastras. Like very, very similar instruction. If one does not care for the verdict of the Shastras and dares blaspheme a Vaishnava, he will suffer life after life for this. Okay, so this is the end of the chapter. I'll stop and see if there's any discussion before we start the next chapter.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Of course, if somebody do it consciously an offense to a Vaishnava, this is something, but we know that even unconsciously there are repercussions. And I see that very scary. The pastime of Rupa Goswami, when he was meditating, he was laughing, and then this Brahmana that was walking skew, and then he thought that Rupa Goswami was laughing because he's walking like that, but it was not that case. But it is scary because even unconsciously there can be some backlash.
You're right, Prabhu. So there is some mitigating factor here. Obviously, Rupa Goswami is at a different level than we are. So for us, what we have to worry about is consciously offending. So Vaishnava Aparadh for practicing devotees is deliberately done with malice in heart. So it's not something that is done accidentally. It is not something that was done without malice, in the sense that you come to me and you say, Prabhu, just being my well-wisher, Prabhu, it would be good if you do this. And then I say, why are you giving me advice? I'm busy, don't worry about it. That's not an offense on your part, because I may have taken offense, but there was no malice in your heart. So for practicing devotees, Vaishnava Aparadh is done deliberately, and there has to be malice in the heart. As devotees get more advanced, then their awareness of the nuances of Vaishnava Aparadh become more and more subtle, right? So then, yes, even accidental offenses to the devotees will trigger, and that is more like Krishna's loving pinches. Like sometimes when lovers love one another, they'll pinch, and even though there is some pain, but there is also, it's just intimacy. So that's like Krishna's loving pinches, that Rupa Goswami was thinking of a pastime, laughing, he offended a devotee, and then he saw that he lost taste in chanting. He went to Sanatana Goswami, and then Sanatana Goswami said, oh, you have somehow offended him. And Rupa Goswami was mortified, like, oh my God, I never realized this. And he begged his forgiveness. And that person begged Rupa Goswami's forgiveness. That somehow I became an impediment in your case, and I'm so sorry for being offended. Even though in my heart I knew that you would never offend. So it just gives more loving pastimes to come up. But for us, because otherwise, for practicing devotees, then we will not be able to function. And then, the whole purpose of practicing devotees is to serve in Sangha. Some people become so anal about offenses that they say that the only way to function is that I don't interact with devotees, because every interaction has an opportunity to create some offenses. Right? So when I was in the board of directors of the temple, and the nature of that position is that there is a lot of strife that goes on. Sometimes you're disciplining the temple devotees, sometimes you're chastising the congregation. I mean, in our case, we were also having a lot of back and forth with the GPC, Prabhupada disciple. And I used to be constantly mortified that what is this going to do to me? But then at least I got this understanding that the purpose of all this interaction was to increase the service. And as long as there is no malice in the heart, then it's okay. But completing a thought that if a person, regardless of their own motivation, they see that another Vaishnava has taken offense, then it's always a good idea to seek forgiveness. Because I think all Vaishnava interactions, they result in deepening of the mellow. It's always a good idea to seek forgiveness.
Yeah. One time also, I think you mentioned in one of the lecture that if somebody has done a mental offenses, that means we can also beg forgiveness mentally. If we have done a physical, offenses, then we have to do it physically.
Yeah. It should be commensurate, and even it should be commensurate also to the magnitude, right? So, you push somebody, he falls down and breaks his leg, and then you say sorry and walk away. It's okay, I've done my part. I said sorry, I walked away. So even the seeking out for forgiveness, it should be commensurate to the magnitude of the offense. And it's not that we are unaware of this, because even people in the mode of goodness, they're aligned to this understanding. They try not to offend people. If they offend, they try to pacify them, and the efforts to pacify them is commensurate to how the other person, how much the other person has got offended, right? So it's there in the mode of goodness. In when you're dealing with Vaishnavas or devotees, it just becomes more important.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you.
Prabhu, I just have a question on the same topic. Suppose if I am offending somebody mentally, another Vaishnava, and sometime I heard that some people go and reveal their mental offense. Even Maharaj said that how he revealed this mental offense to another of his god brother. So sometime that is okay, but sometimes when you might think that if you reveal your mind to other person whom you are offending mentally, then the relationship may get spoiled, because the other person may hold something against you. Even though you are apologetic, you are expressing your sincerity, the other person may or may not be at the level of accepting or receiving it in a proper way. So I'm just thinking that how do we I think in that sense, in that case, we just simply, if we know that intuitively, we just pray to Krishna and try to ask for forgiveness mentally. What is your...
So in this age of Kali, as you know, Prabhu, mental offenses don't matter. Right? Whether mental sins don't matter, mental offenses don't matter, mental piety matters, mental purification matters. The danger of becoming a habitual mental offender is that it then will manifest. It goes from thinking, feeling, willing, and doing. And that's the danger, that if one becomes a habitual mental offender, then eventually the person will become a habitual offender in real life. So if one finds oneself doing it, then it's a good idea to check it, to seek counsel. I agree with you. May not be the best idea to go to the person and say that I was thinking this about you. Some cases it may be, some cases it may not be. I have had both situations. I have cases where in a particular situation, a devotee came to me and said, I apologize. I was thinking XXX about you, but now that I know you better, I realize that it was not the right way to do, but I'm sorry for it. And it strengthened the relationship there. And I've seen the opposite also, that people reveal too much and the other person says, really? That's what you were thinking about me, you rascal? How come you're thinking like that about me? So then it kind of affects the relationship. So it's like a judgment call. But what is not a judgment call is that if one sees oneself doing it, then one should check it. Raupad Maharaj gives this example of that the opposite of Vaishnava Aparadh is not doing Vaishnava Aparadh. The opposite of Vaishnava Aparadh is Vaishnava Seva. So one should not just say, I will not offend devotees. One should say that I will serve devotees. Especially one sees that if you're offending a devotee, then in addition to asking for forgiveness, the active way of negating is by doing service. So similarly, one is mentally criticizing a devotee, one should start mentally acknowledging the good qualities of the devotee. That would be the more effective way of negating it. Okay, so if there are no more questions, I prepared a couple of tables for this chapter. I prepared in the sense that they're mostly from this
Did we lose Prabhu?
A quick recap is the beginning of the conversation.
I think we lost you for another 1 minute, but what you were saying, you mostly took in the table, then you were frozen.
Oh, sorry. It was saying connection unstable. I didn't know if it had cut me off. So what I was saying is I've sent the table to Prem Kishore Prabhu, and hopefully he'll send it to you if he hasn't already sent. And a quick recap of the 10th chapter. This is essentially setting the context of the conversation that will happen all the way till 14th chapter, where the king offends Jat Bharat chastises him, king doesn't chastise him, Jat Bharat corrects him, the king begs for forgiveness, asks further questions, and now Jat Bharat will systematically answer the questions in chapters 11, 12, 13, 14. So there are small chapters. My hope is that before I go for my break, I'm at least able to do until 13th chapter. Ideally speaking, so 15th chapter is the logical break. After that, the next part of the canto begins, which is a description of the structure of the universe. But I know 15th chapter. These chapters are also small, except for one chapter that's 33 verse. Other chapters are small. So we'll see. We'll see how much we can go. Okay, so let's move to chapter 11. So the title of chapter 11 is Jat Bharat instructs King Rahugana. The chapter has 17 verses in it. And this chapter is actually can be summarized in two phrases, both of which we are very familiar with. The first phrase is that the mind is bad, conditioned mind is bad. Second phrase is liberated mind is your friend. So this is the essence of the instructions. And then he says that the best way to liberate mind is by Bhakti. But now he is speaking more analytically. Right? So he basically speaks Sankhya more from the analytical perspective. Okay, so we'll start with verse 1, chapter 11, canto 5. Brahman vacha akovid vadvadan vadasatho na tivedam varishta na surya hi vyavaraamenam tatva marshena sahamananti.
The Brahmana Jadbharat said, "My dear king, although you are not at all experienced, you are trying to speak like a very experienced man. Consequently, you cannot be considered an experienced person. An experienced person does not speak the way you are speaking about the relationship between a master and a servant, or about material pain and pleasures. These are simply external activities. Any advanced and experienced man, considering the absolute truth, does not talk in this way."
So what does this verse remind you of? Essentially what Jadbharat is telling King Raghunatha, that while speaking wise words, you're talking like a fool. So does anybody remember a similar rejoinder?
In Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna was talking a bit like that in the beginning.
Correct. So in fact, this is the first thing that Krishna says, that after Arjuna surrenders, there is no one else to help me. So now I must soul surrender to you. Then Krishna says, "Asochanya vasochas tvam pragyavadamscha bhashase." So asochanya vasochas. So while speaking honored words, you are lamenting for that which is not worthy of of grief. Right? So Jadbharat is saying something on a similar platform, that you're asking these questions and commenting on my answers as if you're a very wise person. But the wise do not speak about material topics. So you are pretending to speak like an experienced person, but actually you are inexperienced. Why? Because an experienced person speaks about tattva. He speaks about spiritual truths. He does not speak about such mundane topics as the relationship between a master and a servant, the duty of one person to chastise another person. So he demolishes the foundation on which King Raghunatha was justifying his actions. That may be temporary, but I am still the master, and the body may be temporary, but it is real. So rather than going after each, and he will go after one of them, but rather than now going after each one of them, he said that, why are you even talking all this? Why are you talking about this, the interaction of the modes, when we can do Krishna Katha? You're pretending to be wise, but actually you are not, because you're taking shelter in these material topics. So Prabhupada says that to be released from this material condition, one has to become Krishna conscious and take exalted lessons like Jadbharat, Lord Krishna, and Kapiladev. That is the only way to solve the problems of life. So that is what Jadbharat is chastising. That you are accepting me as a spiritually advanced person, and then you're talking these nonsense things with me, that I am a king and I should do this and that. Whereas you can have a much more fruitful conversation about how to escape from this samsara, how to become Krishna conscious, right? So in establishing this, Jat Bharat is now so he chastises him, but then he will also talk to him about the way to go from the material platform to the spiritual platform, right? So he will explain how the mind is the cause of the material engagement. And as long as one's mind is engaged in the material world, one will be caught in the cycle of samsara. So the only way out is to properly engage the same mind in bhakti. Right? So the king had, like previously given the analogy of when Jat Bharat had said that the body is separate from the soul. Then the king had given the analogy that you put a pot on fire, the pot becomes hot, the milk becomes hot, the rice in the milk becomes hot. So even though they are different levels, but just by proximity, they are getting hot. So Jat Bharat is now establishing the foundation to reject such analogies, because this analogy is defective. You're essentially mixing material and spiritual things. So you can say that yes, the pot is heating the milk and the milk is heating the rice, but just because that happens, that does not explain the relationship between the body and the soul. There's a different analogy that can be used to explain the relationship between the body and the soul. Right? So just because one analogy works does not mean that you can apply it to explain something that is unrelated. Because Jat Bharat will say that the milk in the pot is connected to the pot, but the soul has no connection with the body. And the only reason the soul appears to be connected to the body is because of the illusion of the mind. So there are two different scenarios. So that analogy that you're giving is another sign of your being inexperienced. Okay, verse 2. Tatheva rajan urugar meda vitan vidyoru vijrubeteshu navedavadeshu hitatvada prayena shuddhon chakashati sadhu.
My dear king, talks of relationship between the master and the servant, the king and the subject, and so forth are simply talks about material activities. People interested in material activities, which are expounded in the Vedas, are intent on performing material sacrifices and placing faith in their material activities. For such people, spiritual advancement is definitely not manifest.
So the king might say that how can you say that I am confused? How can you say that I am inexperienced? Because everything that I'm speaking is from the Vedas, which is true. Actually everything that he has said is from the Vedas. So in response to this implicit question, in 2 verses, Jat Bharat will say that yes, it is true that you're speaking for the Vedas, and the Vedas is for less intelligent people like you. So just because something is there in the Vedas does not make it absolute. So he uses 2 words. He says that na Vedavadeshu. So there are the Vedvadas, and then he says Tattvavada. There are the Tattvavadas. So the Vedavadas, and this comes in the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Yamimam Pushpitam Vajam, Prapatante Upashchita, Vedavada Rathaya Parta, Nana Asti Vadana. So Vedavada are those who are too attached to the material aspects of the Vedas, and as opposed to the Tattvavadas, who are more inclined to the Supreme Personality of God, the absolute truth, the Tattva, and things that are related to them. So the discussion about, Vishwanath Chakravarti says that the discussion about the absolute truth is devoid of violence. It's interesting, he says devoid of violence, because if you contrast it with Vedavada, Vedavada has sacrifices in which there is some kind of violence. So Tattvavad is devoid of violence, which is in the mode of ignorance, and it is devoid of passion, material hankering. So one goes there with a lot of material desires. Give me this, give me this. So essentially this verse is defeating the Karma Mimamsa philosophy, which was being propounded by Jat Bharat, that karma is absolute, that the Vedas speak about the karma, we should perform our karmic activities. So Jat Bharat is saying that those who are truly intelligent will not get bound by the karma kand. Right? Prabhupada quotes 240, 243. The men of small knowledge are very much acknowledged to the Vedas. So Prabhupada writes a fairly lengthy and a wonderful purport. I'm going to summarize this. So he says that those who are attached to the material aspect of the Vedas, they are addicted to performing karma activities. What kind of activities? And they will perform Akshayam Havai Chaturmasi Yagya Shukratam Bhavati. So Chaturmash is the 4 months of the rainy season. Devotees, they use that time to do bhajan kirtan. But for the karma kandis also the Chaturmash is important, because they perform many yagyas. And by the yagyas, Urdhvam Gachanti Satvasta. They hope to be elevated to the higher planets. Once they are at the higher planets, they will enjoy for some time, and Kshina Punya Mrati Lok Vishanti. Right? And then once that material is depleted, they again come to Mrati Lok. Right? Prabhupada is just giving us a revision. It's not something we don't know. Then he says that is not the objective of the Vedas. The real objective of the Vedas is explained in the Bhagavad Gita. Right? Vedescha Sarveram Eva Vedo is to understand the essence of the Vedas. And the essence of the Vedas is to understand Krishna. So when one comes to the platform of Upasana and accepts the worship of the Supreme Lord, then he becomes perfect. Aradhanam Sarvesham, Vishnu Aradhanam Param. Of all the kinds of worship, Aradhanam Sarvesham, Vishnu Aradhanam Param, spoken by Lord Shiva, that of all the kinds of worship, the best kind of worship is that of Lord Vishnu. Right? So when one understands the essence of the Vedas, then one engages in the worship of Lord Vishnu, which is the best. And in contrast, a Vedavadi, he will never be purified from material contamination, because he will constantly be going through this cycle of passion and ignorance, being elevated, and then exhausting the piety and falling down. So until a Vedavadi becomes a Tattvavadi, unless a materialist becomes a spiritualist, then the person is going to inquire about the nature of the absolute. Brahmeti Paramatmeti Bhagavaniti Shabdayat. And this is from Bhagavatam, I think 1-11. Vadanti tattva tattva vedas tattvam yash jnana madvayam brahmeti paramatmeti Bhagavaniti Shabdayati. Those then Prabhupada says those who are Vedvadis are actually not advanced in knowledge. And then he also condemns the Jnanavadis. The Vedvadis are those who are pursuing material elevation. Jnanavadis are who are looking for Brahman liberation. And he says even they are not perfect. So even after understanding, why are they not perfect? Because if they understand Tattva, then they must act upon it and worship Lord Vishnu and his expansions. Unless one does that, one is not perfect. Bhaunam Janmanaman Ante Jnanavan Man Prapadyate. So unless a person in knowledge comes to the Mam Prapadyante stage, the person is not perfect. So Prabhupada says the conclusion is that unintelligent man with the forefront of knowledge cannot understand Brahman, Bhagwan, Brahman, or Paramatma. But after studying the Vedas and attaining the understanding of the absolute truth, one is supposed to be in the platform of perfect knowledge. Right? Prabhupada gives a quick summary of the potency of Bhakti and how should one relate to the Vedas. Okay, verse 3. Natasya tattva grahanaya saksha varishyer vacha samasan swapnen ruktya gramedi sokhyam na yasya heyano mitam swayam syat.
A dream becomes automatically known to a person as false and immaterial. And similarly, one eventually realizes that material happiness in this life or in the next, on this planet or in a higher planet, is insignificant. When one realizes this, the Vedas, although an excellent source, are insufficient to bring about direct knowledge of the truth.
So the previous verse of Jat Bharat may have been a big shock to the king, because the king is described as Jnani, which means that he had studied the Vedas. That's what his main focus was, to study the Vedas. And then in one verse, the Jat Bharat, he has rejected the Vedas. So the king might say that, Vishwanath Chakravarti says that King Raghunath may say, is it not impudent that you have a method of teaching the materialists, but you will not teach them? In other words, what he is saying is that why is the Vedas being given if they are not meant to be followed? And so the point is, Vishwanath Chakravarti might ask is that if you are saying that the real purpose is to elevate the materialists to spiritualists, then why don't you just teach them this? Why do the Vedas promote methods for material enjoyment? And is it not impudent for you to reject the Vedas? Now, he does not actually say that. Vishnu Chakravarti is interpolating the question. So Jat Bharat is responding to that and says that the Vedas are meant for many, but not for all. Important distinction. It is meant for many, which means that it is meant for the majority of the people, but it is not meant for everybody. So who is it not meant for? For those who realize that material happiness is insignificant like a dream. The Vedas, though an excellent source, becomes an insufficient method for understanding the highest truth. So, Jat Bharat is now separating spirituality from materialism. Right? So he's saying, yes, the Vedas is good for those who have material aspirations, but not everybody. Majority, yes, but not everybody. And what I am speaking to you is at a much higher platform. So Prabhupada says that in the Gita, Krishna advises Arjuna to become transcendental to the material platform, impelled by the three moods. Traiguni Vishaya Veda. Nistraya Gun Bhava Arjuna. So then he later says the karmis work hard day and night for some bodily comfort. The jnanis simply speculate to get out of the entanglement of karma and merge into the Brahman. The yogis are very much addicted to getting siddhis. All of them are trying to be material perfect, but a devotee very easily comes to the platform of nirguna in devotional service, and consequently for the devotee the result of karma, jnana and yoga become very insignificant. Right? Which is, since the karma, jnana and yoga is the predominant part of the Vedas, by transitivity one understands that the Vedas become very insignificant for the devotee. And Prabhupada says, of course, the jnani's position is better than the karmi, but that position is also insufficient. The jnani must actually become liberated, and after liberated, he may be situated in devotional service. Same. So paraphrasing of this same Vibhunam Jananam Jnanavanma Prapadyante. Okay, so let's move on to verse 4. Yavan manorajasa purushasya satvena vatam savanarudam cheto virakut viratnoti nirum kusham kushalam chetaram va.
As long as the mind of the living entity is contaminated by the free mode of material nature, goodness, passion, and ignorance, his mind is exactly like an independent, uncontrolled elephant. It simply expands its jurisdiction for pious and impious activities by using the senses. The result is that the living entity remains in the material world to enjoy and suffer pleasures and pain due to material activity.
So previously, Jad Bharat had spoken about rejecting material in favor of spiritual. Now the question is that why is one attracted to material? Why cannot one automatically take to spiritual? Why is the majority of the Vedas directing people to material? So in 5 verses, from this verse to verse 8, Jad Bharat talks about the nature of the mind. Yeah. The essence is that it's the mind that is forcing you to be attracted to the material. The mind is contaminated by the 3 moods. And it is like an uncontrolled elephant, nirankusham. So ankush means to control. And nirankusham is without any control. So the mind that is contaminated by the Traigunya is nirankusham. And then it expands through pious and impious activities through the knowledge and the action senses. So the Chetobhir and Akutubhir. Right? So the power of the mind is that it has the ability to expand unlimitedly. And Jad Bharat will speak more about this. But that's the real. So if there is one bad element in a group of people, and the person is isolated and staying separate, then it is not a real danger. He's a danger to himself, but otherwise not. But if that person has this ability to go and infect other people, so just like the virus, like he infects 2 people, those 2 people infect 2 people, and then pretty soon everybody is infected. That's the nature of the mind. The mind is not sitting on its own. It is controlling the Chetobhir and Akutbhir, the knowledge senses and the action sense. Each of these senses are controlling unlimited number of objects. The combination of the objects and the senses and the mind, it becomes infinite. That's the potency of the mind to do harm. The Prabhupada says in the purport that Chaitanya Charitamrita, it is said that material pious and impious activities are both opposed to the principle of devotional service. Devotional service means mukti, freedom from material entanglement, both pious and impious. And Prabhupada is making a point that one should not be unduly attracted to piety. That's the nature of Vedas. Vedas never ask you to do pious activities. They'll ask you to do pious activities. So Prabhupada is cautioning that one should not get attracted to piety for the reasons he has given before, that it is at the end of the day still materially binding. So then he says to change the consciousness from ignorance to passion, from passion to goodness, does not really solve the problem. Like he gives this analogy otherwise. It's like going from a class C prison to a class B prison to a class A prison, but you are ultimately still in the prison. So what is the solution? Sagunan samityetan brahmabhuyaya kalpate. That one must come to the transcendental life. Like one must get out of the jail. Otherwise, life's mission is never fulfilled. Okay, so we'll do 2 more verses and then stop for any discussion. Verse 5. Savashanatmavis. That's a different one. Savashanatma vishaprakto guna pravaho vikrita sodashtama vivarat prahanama virupabedam antarbhavishtam cha purayestanoti.
Because the mind is absorbed in desires for pious and impious activities, it is naturally subjected to the transformation of lust and anger. In this way, it becomes attracted to material sense enjoyment. In other words, the mind is conducted by the modes of goodness, passion, and ignorance. There are 11 senses and 5 material elements. And out of these 16 items, the mind is as chief. Therefore, the mind brings about birth in different types of bodies among demigods, human beings, animals, and birds. When the mind is situated in a higher or lower position, it accepts a higher or lower material body.
So having introduced the mind as the chief villain, so once you know the enemy, you're in a better position to fight it. So Jat Bharat, he gives 9 characteristics of the mind in these 2 verses, 5 and 6. So this verse talks about the inconceivable powers of the mind, right? So he says, mind is absorbed in desires for pious and impious activities. And because of that, it is naturally subjected to transformations of lust and anger. And then it becomes attracted to material sense enjoyment. So whether the mind is contaminated by the mode of goodness, which is pious activities, passion or ignorance, which may be pious or impious activities, through the agency of the 11 senses and the 5 material elements, the mind is able to constantly expand its range of influence. And therefore, the mind brings about birth in different types of body. What is the consequence of this? That one is trapped in the cycle of samsara. One may either become a demigod or a human being or an animal or a bird. So this is the power of the mind. Now, specifically, he's qualifying it that this is the power of the mind that is contaminated with the senses. Later on, he will glorify the mind that is not contaminated by the senses. And so mind is powerful. Like, just like if you have a powerful person, if he's with you, you have a powerful friend. If he's against you, you have a powerful enemy. So right now, the mind is against. So Prabhupada he basically talks about why does the mind act in this way. Like Jat Bharat is explaining the symptoms of a contaminated mind. So Prabhupada explains why does this happen. He says it's two-step process. First, the jiva forgets about Krishna, right? And so Krishna bhuli sa jiva anadi bahirmukha. So when the mind forgets about Krishna, then bahirmukha, then it faces outside. And ateva maya tare de samsar dukha. And what happens when the mind faces outside? Maya Devi captures it and gives innumerable number of sufferings in this cycle of samsara, birth and rebirth. Samsara is generally used for reincarnation, the cycle of birth and death. Samsara dukha, continuous birth and death. Right, so two-step process. The mind becomes bahirmukhi, Krishna bhuli, bahirmukhi, and then ativa paya tarate, and then maya grabs it. Just like child leaves the home and somebody kidnaps the child and tortures the child. So this is the two-step process that Prabhupada says. And Prabhupada quotes Bhagavad Gita. What happens when the mind is captured by maya? Prakriti ki amanani gunakarmani sarvasha. Ahankar mudatma kartaha manyate. Now, what does such a soul start thinking? I am the Prakriti ki amani gunakarmani sarvasha. Ahankar vimudatma. Right? Because the muda is full, the mood is completely full. By what? Ahankar karta aham iti manyate. And what is the result of this? Constant association with the material world, life after life after life. Actually, the Prabhupada says that there are 8.4 million species, and they are all there. Why? Because the mind is polluted by certain material qualities. So each species is to fulfill a certain desire of a jiva. In the center plates of the Bhagavad Gita, we have this picture of somebody sleeping, becoming a bear, and somebody eating a lot of meat and becoming a tiger. So each of these species is in response to a certain set of desires by the contaminated mind. And they perpetuate themselves. The Prabhupada says that in this record, Bhakti Vinod Thakur says, Mayara Vashe Yachabheshe Kacha Hai Buddha Bhai. My dear brother, the spirit soul is completely under the control of Maya, and you are being carried away by its waves. So these verses, they are, at least at this stage, they are rejecting Varnashram Dharma, because that's what the Vedas do. They are rejecting Varnashram Dharma. And Jat Bharat, right from the beginning, has established that platform. Right? So he's not speaking to those who are impious, wanting to become pious. He's speaking to somebody of the caliber of King Ravgana, who is a Jnani, and he's directing him towards Bhakti. Okay. Also, a relevant thought here is that maybe then I'll end with this verse. So, relevant thought here also is that we see that also in the instructions of Srila Prabhupada. So, earlier on, when ISKCON was in the establishment phase, this is from take it from 66 to early 70s, 70, 71, 72, Prabhupada, he spoke about Shuddha Bhakti, pure devotional service, right? He no compromises. He would say, you have to give up everything, join the temple, chant Hare Krishna, go back to Godhead in this very life, make others devotees. So this was during when he was establishing ISKCON. He just spoke about pure bhakti. Later on, when ISKCON started expanding, and this is in the 70s, then Prabhupada started speaking about Varnashram. Right, but then he was speaking Varnashram as a preaching tool for others, not to the devotees. Devotees, he still said that just practice Shuddha Bhakti. But then he said you have to acknowledge that not everybody can come to that platform. So he introduced the concept of Shuddha Bhakti, of Varnashram. And then give up, follow the regulative principles, give up meat eating, etc. Try to live a pious life, chant Hare Krishna also. Right? So Bhakti was introduced as a tool supporting Varnashram for preaching purposes to others. And then towards the very end, and this is when Prabhupada saw the challenges amongst the devotees. And he saw that sannyasis were falling down, and then brahmacharis had challenges staying celibate, and all this friction going on. So then Prabhupada, he started preaching Varnashram Dham even to the devotees. And he said that even those who are practicing devotees, they should practice Varnashram Dham, so that they have shelter from fall down. Like Prabhupada always made this statement that Bhakti is fully independent. But the problem with that is that, yes, Bhakti is fully independent, but if one falls from Bhakti, and if there is no safety net, then the person will fall all the way into ignorance. As some of the earlier devotees, right? For a while they were chanting and dancing, and they fell from there onto the completely other end of the spectrum. Went back to living as hippies, taking drugs, having illicit sex. There's no safety net. So then Prabhupada started talking about the importance of Varnashram, even for the devotees. And also, last phase was more of so the first phase was the establishment phase. The second phase was when he was growing the movement. And the last phase was when he started looking at the maintenance aspect. Now, this movement needs to last for 10,000 years. So, also need to create a legacy. How to create qualified legacy? By devotees nicely following the rules and regulations of married life. But the difference was that Varnashram was a subset of Bhakti. So, for devotees, Bhakti was always predominant. But he introduced the Varnashram as a subset of Bhakti, or Daivi Varnashram, as we say. So, there is a place for Varnashram, there is a place for Bhakti. In this set of chapters, Ajahn Bharat, he will more or less reject Varnashram in favor of Bhakti. And the reason is that the king had already perfected Varnashram. He was beyond Karma Kand, he was at Gyan Kand, he has surrendered, so at a different level. But when we look at these statements, from a practical perspective, we should also understand the bigger picture. Okay, so I'll stop over here and see if there is any thoughts or discussion.
I like this from what you said. The mind is a chief villain.
Did my internet freeze again? I saw that connection unstable coming.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, I know. I was saying that I like this what you said. The mind is a chief villain.
Yeah, he says chief villain because it is in command with all the other villains. There are the five senses, knowledge senses, the five working senses, and then you have the object of the senses, object of the body. So there's all these smaller villains. Mind is sitting at the top as the chief villain. Okay, there are no more questions, we'll end here. We'll resume next Monday. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Anant Koti Vaishnavind ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Jai Gaur Premanand. Hare Krishna. Thank you so much.